You are listening to the Kelly Confidential podcast with Kelly Wilkes. This is episode 19. Welcome to the Kelly Confidential Show, where we talk negotiation essentials and those crucial conversations empowering extraordinary women. Real women, real issues. Let's jump in. Hey, lovely people. How are you so far? I hope you're having a great week. We're now into October. Officially, this is fall, autumn if you're in Britain. And it's one of those times of year that I absolutely love. I love the colors of the leaves as they're turning. I grew up in Colorado, as many of you know, and watching the mountain aspen trees turn rich yellows, reds, oranges was really an annual feast for the eyes, and it was spectacular. And here in Britain, I've enjoyed a similar experience watching the giant oak and chestnut trees around me changing each season. And so I took my lovely old dog Annie to her favorite park yesterday. You can probably hear it in my voice. We've both been really under the weather recently. So I thought fresh air is the thing to do the trick. And I thought we'll head to the park and this will help. And we went and sat in the park for a bit and just watched the world go by. And I was struck by two things. One, how green and full everything was. And also how warm it was. It was like thick, humid, 22-degree weather, which is like, I think, mid-70s Fahrenheit. And I thought, whew, Mother Nature is confused. She's given us May, June vibes when we should be feeling some crispness around now, like jacket weather, and seeing the leaves drying and changing and falling off the trees. This is when it happens. But I don't see that even closely, near to happening. The trees are very full and green. So yeah, it was nice not to wear a jacket, but it's very strange all the same. And this is a good segue into my episode this week, which is to please greet autumn gently. Be kind as you head into the changing season. This is especially directed to my sisters out there because autumn is the hardest on the planet for increased production of carbons and methane gases made from plastics and animal hides, which is why this is so important, because this affects women far more than men. And I'm going to break it down for you. Stay tuned. So to properly understand this whole interconnected topic, we have to look firstly at the bigger sphere of human influence in the world and the relation to the climate. Now, this is a big topic. I've covered this in detail in March. In one of my earlier podcasts, you can catch the wider episode in episode 6, how women are disproportionately affected by climate change. But I'll cover some of the key points here as background. Now, I know my podcast focuses on negotiation matters. So what does this have to do with climate change, I hear you thinking? Well, listen on and I'll explain. But the short answer is that women need to negotiate more. Women need to build and flex their negotiation muscles far more boldly than we ever have to close the gap of influence, full stop, but also to see changes in critical matters adversely affecting our quality of life everywhere. Starting with the fact that despite many developed countries having celebrated the 100th anniversary of emancipation in the last sort of 10 years, many countries did, women still remain in the bottom 30th percentile globally for positions of power and influence. These disparities are represented in these few statistics I'm going to share with you, but very important statistics. So for land ownership, a mere 12.6% of women have land ownership globally. For small business ownership, women are within 20% globally. Corporate executive posts, women hold between 5 and 9% as an average globally. In terms of having access to capital and investor funding, which is critical for bringing new innovations, creative ideas, materials, products, services into the marketplace. Critical funding. Women have a mere 6 to 16% globally, and this actually shrinks down to 1.5% to 2% depending on the industry you're in, particularly in IT and science industries. And finally, for positions of municipal, state, and federal political office, women hold 30% and under globally. And for some time now, the UN has been charting the effects of climate change on women and found that women were disproportionately disadvantaged far more than men. So much so that specific provisions for women have been made in the 2015 UN Paris Agreement, SDG 5 specifically. That's Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality, which is part of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. The BBC reported in 2018 that UN figures indicated that 80% of people displaced by climate change, meaning lost their homes, their houses, their community, their source of income, 80% of people displaced by climate change are women. 80%. That's an extraordinary number. Now, why is this? Many reasons. Partly because around the world, especially in developing and poorer nations, women are left behind to tend to the homestead, the land, the livestock management, and their families, of course, children, while the men go to town to work or to sell goods or services. Then enter weather-based climate change, where increasingly sustained dry periods lead to drought or fires, where prolonged rains lead to extreme flooding, deadly mudslides, and all of these result in land unfit to grow crops or feed livestock, and it ultimately creates food shortages, famine, disease, leaving women and their families far more vulnerable than ever before. And this issue of imbalance isn't limited to just rural and underdeveloped areas. This is a global issue. Statistically, women have less socioeconomic power than men, and the notable underrepresentation of female political leaders to influence the laws and balance access to jobs and resources means that women are far more likely to experience poverty and will suffer more and for longer when trying to rebuild following an extreme weather or climate disaster. Climate change is a global crisis that affects all of us, but its impacts are not equal. Women more than men are left far more vulnerable by the consequences of a changing climate, and their voices are often left out of that decision-making process that could mitigate it. Women are disproportionately affected in these 3 key ways. Number 1, food insecurity. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, women make up the majority of small-scale farmers in developing countries and are responsible for a significant portion of food production. Climate change impacts like unpredictable weather patterns, droughts, and floods make it harder for these women to grow crops and feed their families, leading to increased food insecurity. Number 2, health risks. Climate change can lead to the spread of infectious diseases like malaria and dengue fever, among others, which disproportionately affects women and children. In addition, natural disasters and displacement due to the extreme weather events can lead to a loss of access to healthcare and safe water, putting women's health at risk. And number 3, economic insecurity. Women are more likely to work in low-paying, informal sectors and are often the first to lose their jobs during economic downturns. Climate change impacts like crop failures and declining fisheries can lead to economic hardship, making it even harder for women to make ends meet. These are just a few of the ways that women are affected by climate change. This shows there is a critical need for a gender response approach to tackling the climate crisis. SDG 5 reminds us that we must ensure that the voices and experiences of women are at the center of efforts to address the impacts of climate change. And we can be. Considered the most powerful consumers, women dominate consumer purchasing power, particularly household purchases and decision-making for the household. According to MSN's January 2023 article, women contribute to 37% of the global GDP, but over 80% of purchases and purchase influence globally is held by women, including the decision-making for 91% of new home purchases in the US market, and it's not far off here in the UK. The most successful business leaders, and indeed politicians, have realized in the past decade that if you want to sell an idea or product, market to women. And this, my friends, is where the relationship fails women time and again. Fast fashion. This is the crux of my episode today. So what is fast fashion? It's a high production, cheaply made garment, typically mass produced in low-income countries with ambiguous human rights oversight. I've covered some of the human rights issues in my March podcast, so I'm not going to talk about that here, and I'm instead focusing on climate issues instead. So let's take a look at fast fashion stats and what it all means. Here's stat number 1. Women contribute to more than 80% of fast fashion globally. So we're buying the bulk of these cheaply made products globally by a long mile. 80% of it is being purchased by us. The same gender that is being so dramatically and disproportionately disadvantaged by its impact on the climate. Stat number 2, with the advent of fast fashion consumerism, in just the last short 15 years, clothing sales have doubled from 100 billion units a year to a skyrocketing 200 billion units a year, mainly due to social media and online purchase platforms. And this is despite the fact that the average number of times an item was worn has dropped by 36% overall. Stat number 3, according to the UNEP, 20% of global wastewater, this is 20% of total wastewater globally, is produced by the textile and fashion industry. How? By consuming around 93 billion cubic meters of water for textile dyeing, leaving the rest contaminated by toxic chemicals. And because the majority of countries producing fast fashion are heavily underregulated, that contaminated wastewater ends up where? Well, it ends up in their rivers and seas. And what does that do? It makes everybody sick that lives near those rivers and seas. And it kills the animals and the habitat. Number 4, as purchasers, we as women, remember this is predominantly women, throw out roughly 92 million tons of clothes. 92 million tons. This is clothes and, or I should say, clothes-related waste. 92 million tons of clothes-related waste, comprising clothes and the plastics used to package them. This equates to a garbage truck of clothes, either incinerated or left to the landfill every second of the day. Enough to fill the Empire State Building full to the top every single day on repeat. I must admit, these stats in particular are quite distressing. I find them upsetting. And number 5 statistic, fast fashion produces 500,000 tons of microplastics. Microplastics is something that more and more businesses and consumers even are talking about, and it's important that you all know what they are. They come from certain forms of fabric in particular, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about them, but they are so polluting. So fast fashion itself produces 500,000 tons of microplastics that end up in our oceans every year. What are microplastics? They are tiny microfilaments shed during the wash and dry cycle of cheaply made polyester and nylon fabrics. So plaguing is the issue of microplastics that they are now virtually everywhere in our environment. Apparently found not just everywhere in the seas and in the digestive tracts of our fish and sea life, but airborne and carried through the rain and the snow, and have ended up in tests conducted as high as the peaks of Mount Everest. So what can we do about it? Well, we need to be better buyers. more discerning, more shrewd, and more influential in our choices. Let's take a look at 3 ways we can have a more positive impact to reduce the microplastics and pollution in our climate and make strides to better the lives of women, irrespective of where we live. Okay, so number 1, avoid the most polluting products. So these are polyester and nylon. Polyester and nylon products are the biggest culprits for microplastics. Polyester is a synthetic fabric that's derived from petroleum. This fabric is one of the world's most popular textiles because it's cheap and it can be used in everything from clothes to furniture, luggage, and it's used in thousands of those products. Polyester was created in the 1940s. It's a manufactured synthetic fiber made from a chemical reaction involving petroleum, air, and water. It is a form of plastic. Alternatives to oil-derived polyester exist, including those made from recycled plastic, agricultural crops, or even waste. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about those in a moment. Polyamide is similar in its petroleum production and reliance on fossil fuels. Polyamide is also available in recycled materials, but if the product description doesn't expressly state recycled in the same line, such as recycled polyamide or recycled polyester, it is not made from sustainable materials and is in fact one of the highest pollution creating materials on the planet. And I suppose if you take nothing else away from this episode today, please take away that polyester is bad for the planet. Okay, so, and I guess the other major takeaway is make sure you're reading the labels. It's really important. The days of just buying stuff and not reading what it's made of, those are so behind us. And number 2, okay, limit purchases that are made from animals. There's really far too much subject matter to properly cover this issue and really the horrors of factory farming animals for meat and textiles. And also because I know that for many people, it's just not practical, right? Depending on where you live, if not impossible, to find shoes that aren't made from some form of cow or animal leather and other resources that aren't made from that leather. Anyway, but please be aware that many designers are making high-grade vegan and vegetarian alternatives for men and women's dress shoes and boots and bags and so forth. Jackets, you can buy beautiful, high-quality, vegan, sustainable jackets that look just like your, well-cherished biker jacket. And the market is growing every day. It's impressive, actually. Why is this important for us and our children? Because bovine farming, so that's cattle farming, is considered the number 1 agricultural source of greenhouse gases globally. And according to researchers, and I've picked up one here from UC Davis University in California, whose Department of Animal Science routinely studies cow and climate change, said that each year a single cow will belch around 220 pounds of methane. Methane from cattle is shorter lived than carbon dioxide, but it's 28 times more potent in warming the atmosphere. And of course, I don't expect to see the total elimination of beef from diets in my lifetime or the use of leather in my lifetime, especially as certain places in the world have no or very limited choice but to rely on beef for food and clothing. But the reliance is certainly shifting. And we've proven we don't need it to have a healthy and diverse diet, and that there are other climate-friendly materials outside of leather that can be considered as viable alternatives. And that brings us to number 3. Focus on natural and sustainable fabrics and textiles. Sustainable meaning where it continues to generate or the animal isn't slaughtered for use of the product. And these types of fabrics are fabrics made from cotton, hemp, and wool. Cotton is a natural fiber coming from the seed pod of the cotton plant and has been in existence for thousands of years and is a very strong fiber and resilient fiber. It can be washed several times. It holds its shape and form and can keep you warm and dry. Industrial hemp is a form of cotton. It's a plant separate from the once stigmatized THC-rich marijuana-type hemp. That's different, but it comes from the same kind of plant family. It's industrially harvested and cultivated from the cannabis sativa plant, farmed for both its inner fibers, which are used for building materials, animal bedding, etc., fuel even, and outer fibers being used to create ropes and cotton-like yarn. And from the latter, high-strength hemp cotton is produced, forming long-wearing, resilient fabrics, somewhat like a cross between linen and normal cotton. And finally, in this group, wool. Wool is a sustainable form of fabric, yarn, and it is shorn from the sheep's and alpacas even over repeated seasons without the need to slaughter the animal to create the product. So, but where to start? Well, being that it is fall, autumn, depending on where you live, I've had a mooch around looking for one of the most widely purchased padded garments, the padded vest, or quilted gilet, as they say in the UK. This is one of the most popular purchases this time of year. And this is like the sleeveless version of a fully padded coat. Now, to make it more realistic, I've gone to popular high street brands. That's where I've started in my search. And I looked at both expensive and cheaper brands. And whereas fast fashion trends typically use the cheaply made polyester, climate-savvy buyers can count on some fashion houses to produce more sustainable, high-quality products. But let's see what my research shows, and I've dropped these into the show notes for you. So Barbour was top of my list for the year, especially for outdoor wax jackets, which are made of 100% heavy-duty cotton. If you live in Britain and you own a dog, it's pretty much assured that you have a Barbour wax jacket. These things are waterproof and nearly impenetrable from the British weather. And yeah, it's almost a must-have. And they're just great jackets. One of my Barbour jackets, I think I had it for like 8 years. I mean, this thing was just amazing quality. But I was shocked last week to find that Barbour, usually very high quality, but with a high price tag, was selling a 199-pound padded gilet. So that's roughly, what is that? Probably just shy of $250. Was selling a padded gilet. So this is a quilted vest, and it was made with nearly 100% polyester and a bit of cotton trim. I couldn't believe it. Really, really disappointing. I checked a few other padded items and saw no reference to recycled materials, which, I mean, is such a huge, important thing to state. And I just did not see that on there. It looks like it's pure polyester and cotton trim. Anyway, moving on, I checked for the same style of quilted gilet from fast fashion retailer H&M. And in this case, for a mere 26 pounds, roughly $30, you can get one of these jackets. And I think the reality of a 26-pound padded jacket tells us that it will be made from the cheapest materials. And it was polyester. Both brands offered products that, as labeled on their online portal, if believed to be accurate, is, the products are in their current advertised state are bad for the environment. But the consumer is doubly screwed on the purchases with Barbour because of the really high cost. You're paying a high price for a polyester coat. Yeah. So this is public service notice number 2. Public service notice number 1 was be kind to the fall. Be kind and gentle to autumn. Be shrewd in how you're buying. Public service notice number 2 is don't be fooled by the traditional quality shops, because they're just repackaging cheap materials with a fancy label. And your trust and faith in them is being compromised with each purchase, in addition to the fact that your purchase is adding to the carbon in the climate. By contrast, here are some retailers really trying hard to bridge the gap and use recycled materials or limit their water and fossil fuel consumptions. First up, Superdry. At 119 pounds, their seasonal pâte à Gillet is polyester made up of 100% recycled materials. So their polyester is made from plastic bottles. Each jacket contains between 5 and 48 recycled bottles, depending on the weight and amount of fill used, saving waste being sent to landfill and polluting our oceans. Total winner. Next up, Gant. At 220 pounds, expensive by all accounts, but I'm still offering it. 220 pounds, their autumn pâte à Gillet is likewise made up of 100% recycled polyester. So the shell is recycled polyester, the lining is recycled polyester, 100% recycled polyester, and the padding is also 100% recycled polyester. 220 pounds, to be sure, is a bit steep, but it shows you the entire product can be produced without the high polluting footprint of some of its out-of-touch competitors. Next up, Holland & Cooper's pâte à Gillet at 189 pounds. It cites a filling of Sorona ecofibers, which I Googled and found is made by DuPont and claims to be 37% plant-based. However, the outer materials, so the inner filling is Sorona ecofibers, 37% plant-based. The outer jacket is still 92% polyester, and not the recycled kind. This is the really bad for the planet kind. 92% polyester. And the lining of the Holland & Cooper pâte à Gillet is 100% polyester, none of which is stated to be of the recycled or sustainable kind. And remember again that polyester, the traditional polyester, is a cheap fossil fuel product made from petroleum. So really surprising. Holland & Cooper has, they've got a good standing, and quite surprised to see this. So yeah. At the mid-range price, I checked out Marks & Spencer's and Esprit. Both carry a limited selection of gilets and other padded outerwear, and encouragingly are made from recycled polyester and nylon. Not all of them, but a good handful of them. You just have to go to their website and just click on the button about the product description to read the material, the fabric material. I was happy and encouraged, though, by that. Marks & Spencer's and Esprit, check them out, winner. And to finish things off, I've comprised a list of other sustainable online clothing companies to watch, starting with the Recycled Planet. It's called the Recycled Planet. I've put all of these in the show notes. It's a great site, really on trend, beautiful clothing made from recycled plastics and fully leaning into their vision. The challenge, however, the price tag is, wow, it's way too expensive. $350 to $500. So this is a US-based online retailer. $350 to $500 per item. It makes it difficult to see how these guys are going to shift consumer spending within their target market, which is really only within 1% to 2% of global consumers at the top end. It's just too expensive. But I'm pleased to see that, there are companies out there trying. Next up, Bernardo Fashions. So they use EcoPlume recycled materials, equally beautiful products at about a third of the cost of the Recycled Planet. BernardoFashions.com. Link is in the show notes. And last but not least, thanks to the sustainablejungle.com. That's all one word, sustainablejungle.com. I really liked their site. They provide a list of vetted online stores for sustainable winter coats. And not only do they provide a list of eco-friendly fashion houses, each shop is vetted for its fair labor practices. So it gives you all the links, tells you a bit about the company, tells you about their materials and their labor practices. Something that extraordinarily is still not federally mandated in the United States, which I've talked about before. That's a discussion for another episode. But there's some great brands on there. Check them out and see what you think. The key is to think about what you're buying. And as I wrap up, I guess that is what I'm asking you to do. So, go into fall and be gentle on what you're doing with your footprint on the world. Think about what it means for your habitat and the lives of millions of women who may not have the same options and resources that you have to make their lives more comfortable. And we really must do this together. So thanks for listening today. Stay warm, stay dry, and join us next week when I will be sharing a 2-part episode on how to negotiate with a bully. Until then, take care.